Oi, oi, it's your boy, thick as do juicy, Jack Slack. It's the Jack Slack podcast, and we're coming at you following UFC, what was it? 282. A disaster of an event in many ways. Pretty entertaining event in many ways. I'm going to be the ultimate contrarian here and say that I, Jack Slack, man who complains about fights a lot, thought the main event was fine. I thought it was pretty decent. And, I wasn't excited about it beforehand, but I thought the fight turned out fine. And Dana White left during the fight, told everyone afterwards that he drifted off in the third round and then left to book Glover Teixeira versus Jamal Hill for the light heavyweight title that was on the line in this fight. So I have no idea what he was looking at. I suspect he was just angry about the Paddy Pimblett stuff 15 minutes earlier, but that was bizarre. We said this, everyone knew you slap a title on a fight when it's not good enough, but you need to justify the pay-per-view price. So they slapped a title on this, thrown together at the last minute light heavyweight bout. And they actually came out afterwards and just admitted that that's what they were doing and that it didn't matter anyway. The titles were made up and the points didn't count. So we'll get into all that craziness in a minute, but I suppose what you're probably here for, and what I'll probably go with for the thumbnail and the title, is Paddy Pimblett, quote-unquote, beating Jared Gordon. This would be, I think, the second horrible decision on Paddy's record. If you don't know, Julian Erosa slapped the shit out of him, and it was in Cage Warriors. Cage Warriors head honcho is now managing Paddy. It was in Cage Warriors back in 2016 at featherweight, and Julian Erosa slapped the shit out of him, hit him in the body a load of times. Paddy threw up Brown in the cage afterwards and still got the decision somehow. But yes, this fight, it was, it's a bit of a nightmare because Paddy Pimblett, from the moment he got to the UFC, he wasn't looking great against fairly mediocre opposition in the grand scheme of elite world talent. And, he fought another not amazing fighter here. Jared Gordon's fine. He's good. He's better than, he's probably top 100 in the world at lightweight. But the one time he fought a really world-class fighter, he got banged out in under a minute by Charles Oliveira. His signature win going into this was a win over Leo Santos, who's 90 years old and doesn't train cardio. And even then, he was the only person to not finish Santos in his current losing streak of 3 or 4 or whatever it is. So not the most dangerous opposition in the world. No finishes going back to 2017. And 2 standing knockouts ever. So yeah, it was pretty clear that he was a good opponent for Paddy in the sense that he's not going to chin him. However, he did spend the first 2 rounds chinning him. This was really weird, especially because of how much I've seen of Paddy Pimblett in this documentary footage that they're always putting out about him training at a boxing gym, working on his boxing, telling everyone how hard he's working on his boxing, the boxing trainers saying how hard he's working on his boxing. And he's got really fundamental mechanical issues, just habits that he's got that could be trained out and should have been trained out. There's 2 particularly big issues. Well, 3, but it's variations of the chin coming up in the air and admiring his work, so to speak. But number 1 is when he jabs, he lifts his head up and he keeps his right hand low, and it's almost like he's looking over the top of the exchange to see if his jab lands. And that gets him chinned with counter jabs and counter left hooks or overhands across the top. And then the other one is that when he throws his right hand, he often ends a combination with his right hand. But if he throws the left hook afterwards, his right hand comes back to the center of his chest. If he just throws the right hand to end the combination, he leaves his chin out and he just looks at it. And this is something that we've been talking about since 2012, 2013, whenever I started writing. But closing the door. And that's one way of dealing with it. This is the thing. This is a massive technical, mechanical thing that's getting him hit in lots of fights. It happened with Luigi, whatever his name was. Happened in this one. Getting hit after he throws the right hand. And it's not a case of you need to get the hand back quicker. There are 8 different things you can do to cover that hole. One of the reasons that we always stressed closing the door, i.e. throwing the left hook or the left jab to put you back in a bladed stance and get your right hand back in guard, is that that's the easiest one to just That's the easiest one to remember if you're very, very tired or you're just not thinking. You could end a combination with your right hand or end an attack with your right hand and weave out to your right. You could duck straight down. You could lean off to your left. You can get down behind your right shoulder. It's not even necessary to be fast. You don't need to hit them with the right hand and pull it back. You can hit them with the right hand, turn down behind your right shoulder and wait for the return and then get back on stance after it's been. That sounds super swish, but people like Rafael dos Anjos and Overeem have pulled it off in MMA fairly successfully. If you watch Israel Adesanya or Anderson Silva, they're very good at throwing their right hand and then framing on the opponent or keeping their shoulder high while they frame on the opponent. Or you can frame over the opponent's shoulder and keep your shoulder high. There's 100 ways to do. In fact, even if you're not going super technical, think of someone like Canelo or Roy Jones Jr. I mean, they are technical fighters, but they do this a lot, so you can go and watch footage of it very easily. But they throw a right hand, they finish the combination with the right straight maybe, and they bring it back high like they're saluting, or like they've touched a stove and they're pulling their hand back high off it. And that's a really easy way to stop yourself getting chinned with counter left hooks too. But yeah, like I said, the way that you deal with this is like when you're doing Muay Thai and you're dealing with kicks coming back or whatever. The guy holding the pads has you throw the right hand, and then they slap you with the left mitt when you're, not hard, but they slap you with the left mitt every time after you throw the right hand. So you get in the habit of doing whatever it is they've taught you to do to get back on position or evade the right hand. It's a really fixable problem, and it's been there for many, many fights, and it's very, very strange. So this is the thing. Paddy Pimblett throws his hands hard. I thought his first 1, 2, 3 looked really good. Throws his kicks hard. I've always liked his kicking game. I thought it was really good since his return from injury. When was that? That might have been the Erosa fight, actually. But since quite a while ago, his kicks have looked good. I really like his left teep, his left step up, round kicks to the head. There was an issue. He had the same issue with his right low kick in this one. He was landing it lots, but he's throwing it naked, and he's dropping his hands and standing straight upright, not like leaning offline or anything like that, not framing on the opponent. There's 100 different ways you can mitigate the danger of the opponent. He did none of them. So that was another issue. But, it's not the problem isn't him hitting people. Him hitting people is good. The problem is that good strikers build their game around the assumption that if you're close enough to hit someone, they should be throwing punches back. Dempsey said this in championship fighting. He was saying, like, if you're in exchanging range, you should be throwing punches and expecting punches, or you're going to get knocked out. Never be in exchanging range without punching and worrying about punches coming back. So he's throwing right hands and getting hit with left hooks back by a guy who had like a 62-inch reach. Every time Jared Gordon entered, he went as if to throw the right hand to the body. I don't think he ever really did. And then he'd come up with the left hook afterwards and hit Paddy clean. Paddy kept looking for the right uppercut as Gordon stepped in because Gordon was ducking into the middle of his chest. And he'd throw the right uppercut, he'd hit him in the the head or the chest or in the elbow or whatever, and then he'd be there, and the left hook would just whiz past his completely undefended up in the air chin. He got hit a lot of times in this one, but like just as many punches missed that could have been disastrous for him against a better striker, a more explosive striker, a striker with a bit longer reach. How much confidence do you have giving up those kind of shots for free so readily and so early and so frequently against someone like Charles Oliveira or even Makhachev? Makhachev, not noted as a great striker, more just a clean user of distance and lander of the odd good shot, but still can land a great counter if you don't, if you fuck around, you'll find out. Obviously not anyone with any sense is not considering him in the top end of the division, but you're running out of people you can put him up against who are in the UFC and won't give him horrible problems for the way that he's striking. And then the grappling, he couldn't get Gordon down. Gordon got him down a couple of times. Wasn't tremendously threatening, but the decision on this was bizarre because Pimblett did nothing offensively for the most part. Well, in the first round, he was a bit better, but he was outstruck numbers-wise and quality of the strikes-wise. In the second round, he was just a bit better, but in the third round, he didn't really do anything except get taken down and get back up again. Now, I'm big on scoring damage, but he wasn't doing any damage either. So then you go down the criteria and you say, what's left to judge? And the fact that he couldn't really stop... he did stop some takedowns from Gordon, but Gordon was still getting him down. Basically, his only moments of offense in the third round came because Gordon got on his back and slid over the top and let him on top briefly. Actually came off a nice... Paddy had the overhook along the fence and he tried to circle away a little bit to get the angle to hit an Uchimata. We've been talking about, or was it an Uchimata or did he step all the way through? But those overhook throws off the fence, we've been talking about them for a while, but he did one to Levitt, I think it was. And Makachev does them all the time. Oliveira used one against Makachev to get off the fence against Makachev. But yeah, he went for one of those and Gordon read it really well and turned him around and dunked him on the floor. But in the course of trying to jump on Paddy's back, he fell off him. But yeah, there just wasn't a lot of... Because even afterwards, Paddy was doing interviews and he's saying, damage, mate. And you're going, there wasn't really any damage. And, whenever someone goes, look at his face, it just reminds me of Lennox Lewis doing that after the Vitaly Klitschko fight. Look at his face is never a great argument. So, very strange. The whole thing... We're going to talk about this now, because this is probably a good time to get into it, but the UFC is undergoing a crisis of confidence from fans and especially gamblers. And the gambling thing is huge. If you hadn't noticed it, it's incredibly... it's like ubiquitous in American culture right now. All the events are sponsored. All sporting events are sponsored by betting companies. When about 15 years ago, betting wasn't legal in most states. Maybe not 15 years ago, but I remember watching The Simpsons 15, 20 years ago, and Homer's doing the gambling pool illegally with Moe, and now it's legal in 30, 40 states, and you're constantly being advertised to. Spend your money on this, spend your money on this. And the ways you can bet are getting more and more ridiculous. And they got Anik reading you like the big bets coming in and stuff like that. It's constant. And the problem is that with the James Krause stuff, which I don't think we talked about at length on this this podcast before. But James Krause worked out, allegedly, this is all under investigation still, worked out a loophole whereby you could bet against fighters. If you know your fighter is injured, tell people to bet. Maybe you can't bet against them, but you could sell your pick against your fighter. And it's not technically throwing a fight. I mean, this is the allegation with the Minner stuff. Derek Minner came in with an injured leg, threw a kick, immediately went down, was TKO'd. I don't think Minner threw the fight, but I think Minner had to fight because he had no money. Think about it like TJ Dillashaw. He's achieved as much in the sport as anyone could ever hope to. He's a 2-time world champion, and he still couldn't turn down or postpone that title fight against Aljamain Sterling. He had to go through with it, even though his shoulder had popped out something like 20 times in training. His answer was to tell the ref that if his shoulder popped out, he knew how to pop it back in before the fight. So yeah, if people need to fight for the money, they're not going to call it off when they're injured. So they're going to go like, well, I'm only going to get half the money that I could if I won. So why don't I? Ellipses. And allegedly, James Krause's why don't I? Ellipses was to have a betting group and tell them to bet on fights that he had information on that the fighters were. And it's been coming out that it may be happening in a lot of gyms where people know someone's injured. It's getting to the point where if you're in the town with one of these big gyms and you're a grappler or something like that, just go down and roll with some of the fighters and ask them up front, just be like, is there anything I should watch out for? Then if they're injured and they've got a fight coming up, go bet on it or bet against them. But yeah, so there's this whole Krause scandal. Krause has been, his podcast's ended. He's deleted the entire YouTube. He's deleted the Discord server. The UFC have said that, and it was Aaron Brunstad, I can't remember his name. Aaron from Twitter. He was interviewing Dana, and Dana was saying like the commissions aren't letting any fighters work with Krause while this investigation is ongoing. And Aaron pushed it and said the commissions, so all the commissions. And then it just came out, Dana had to say, no, the UFC's decided that no one can work with James Krause. So yeah, James Krause is now being scrubbed from the face of the UFC because he was fairly prominent in the UFC. And might go to jail because the lesson is you don't fuck with bettors. You don't fuck with gambling. So people were already a little bit about the UFC this month. And then this decision only helps to raise more questions. Because even if you're giving the most charitable view to Paddy Pimblett, that's insane. And that was, what's his name? Douglas Crosby, very bizarre character, but famously bad judge. I wasn't too familiar with him until last night sorry, not last night, the night before this fight, there was the Bellator event, Sabatello versus Raufeon Stotts. Sabatello is really very impressive cage wrestler, but does no damage from the top, and Stotts pulls his way back into the fight. And at the end of the fight, there were, mixed scorecards, but Crosby was the only person in the world, including Sabatello's mum, who had it 5-0 for the losing fighter. And on MMADecisions.com then tweeted out that that's the first time that's ever happened. A judge giving the losing fighter in a 5-round fight every single round. And then he came and did this. And so my boy Sean Al-Shatti tweeted out, still can't get over that Doug Crosby turned in 2 of the worst scorecards of 2022 in back-to-back days on opposite sides of the country. What a weekend this man had. So yeah, we're in this really weird crisis of confidence, gambling-wise with the UFC. It's all, like, the UFC is all over the place at the moment. It's not been a great year in terms of events not falling through. A lot of big cards have ended in disappointing injuries and things like that. That's all, that's a secondary problem. But then you've got the Krause betting scandal. You've got stuff like this with Paddy where it's not ideal because even if he wins, it looks super sketchy to everyone going forwards. Anyone who watched it thinks he lost. A lot of the hype from him is now going to be gone. He didn't do well in the post-fight by being just not particularly affable about it. And then you've got the main event where the UFC has now said, like, oh, that fight didn't matter and wasn't actually for the title anyway. So a bit of a bait and switch almost, retroactively. People are mad about the split draw in the main event, which, I think justifiable. I can understand how those scorecards came together, but people are still mad about it. And again, compounds with all these other issues. And then you got the weird shit like the UFC, they were doing the thing that the NFL did, where it's like, we're actually spending tons of money researching concussions and finding out how to better prepare our fighters and have them recover better. We've got the Performance Institute and blah, blah, blah. And then trying to advertise Slap Fight. And then fucking selling NFTs of Hasbulla and the Hasbulla kit on EA UFC, which, if you listen to John Anik do the reads, he says it like he hates saying it, and then the other commentators just give about half a minute of dead air, and then they move on every time he does this readout. So, really weird place that the UFC's in, ending 2022. I imagine in 3 months' time, when Paddy Pimblett fights again, we'll be able to salvage some of the hype. People will get back on board it, and if he wins decently, again, it's all water under the bridge. People are Paddy pointed it out himself, but people are very quick to forget, as long as the name on the record, or on the record it says you won. Nobody remembers that when Chuck and Rampage were the best light heavyweights in the world, both of them won awful decisions over Murillo Bustamante. But, you go back and you read the records and it's just both of them beat him. Oh, and I haven't even mentioned, a lot of people turned on Paddy this week because he went after Ariel Helwani really weirdly. His assertion was that Ariel should be paying people for interviews. And then as it came out, his paid interviews were with, like, Howlerhead, which is Dana White's brand. So he's basically a paid spokesperson. That's not an actual interview. And the timing was even better because Ariel won the Journalist of the Year at the World MMA Awards this week for I think the 13th time. Small tidbit, I was up against him once. When was that, like 2016? And then they were like, do you want to come to this award show? And I said no. And I lost that year, obviously. And they haven't ever nominated me since. Never mind. Not claiming I would have won. It's a voting competition. And certainly Ariel has a much bigger listenership and actually does journalism. Because I was like, is there not a category I could be in? They didn't have an Analyst of the Year or anything. They do now, I think. And I've never been nominated for that. Nor Podcast of the Year. Or Media Source of the Year. Not that I'm complaining. But those simps voted Valentina Shevchenko Best Female Fighter of the Year in the year that she almost lost and won a fight by headbutt. It's like if you gave John Jones Fighter of the Year for when he turned up and only fought Dominic Reyes that year and basically lost. Absolute simps, that's what I'm saying. Sorry, having a bit of mince pie. And some tea to wash it down. Bit of Melbourne breakfast. Quickly become my favourite. Yeah, so that's the tea. That's the tea on that entire situation. You've seen all the people in the paddy wigs and shit. He was basically selling this pay-per-view single-handed. If you saw the picture of the stadium during the undercard, nobody there. They just turned up for the fucking co-main event. He's a cultural figure. It's not important that he's not actually one of the best lightweights in the world yet. But good for him. I hope he actually gets gets his bag now, because he's been on a couple of really shady contracts, given how popular he is for them. And, maybe he fights someone really good soon. That was a lot of time to spend on basically drama and technical analysis that comes down to why are you always ending combinations with your right hand and leaving your chin out. But the rest of the fights on this card, not bad. Lots of finishes. I think one decision and it was the main event. Man, that's great. Oh no, 2 decisions, main event and co-main, obviously. Though we just talked about how fucking bad that decision was. So they kept it out of the hands of Doug Crosby for most of the night. But what did I enjoy? Oh, sorry, we'll do the main event first. Jan Blachowicz versus Magomed Ankalaev. I only just realised that Magomed is basically Muhammad when you hear his cornerman say it. Learning new things about different cultures every day through fighting. Reminds me of when I made my Jose Aldo Filthy Casuals guide. Quick one on his low kick checking. It's for some reason it just exploded. It was like the most successful video I've had on my YouTube channel. But it also brought in a load of idiots who were like, it's Jose Aldo. And you're like, no, I could see how you'd think I'd get that wrong, but I actually tried Jose Aldo. And then I was told that Portuguese people, it's Jose. So actually I'm being too culturally aware. But anyway, Ankalaev versus Blachowicz. Ankalaev, really good fighter, really solid all-rounder. One of the very few skilled fighters in the light heavyweight division. I said this on the Boycast, but a couple of years ago, Unibet asked me to write an article about who I thought was like the sleeper to become a champion in the UFC at the moment. And I picked Ankalaev because this was when he was on a 3-fight winning streak after that Paul Craig loss. And nobody was talking about him. It was really weird. Granted, he'd only be fighting like Klidson Abreu and people like that, but he'd been really just dominating. And he dominated every second of that Paul Craig fight up to making a very silly mistake in the last seconds. This is the thing. There is a degree of talent that you can see, and this has been coming up a lot with the Paddy Pimblett stuff. Conor McGregor comparisons. It was pretty clear, to my eye at least. Conor McGregor was something very, pretty special. That's not to say he was guaranteed to become a world champion or anything, but you could see there was a lot of potential in his game there. Whereas Paddy Pimblett he's improving, but it is sort of, you're not looking at it the same way and going, damn, that guy could be really problematic for the top guys. Whereas Ankalaev, you could do that from quite early on in his UFC run. You're going, damn, not a lot of very skilled light heavyweights to keep up with this lad. Meanwhile, Blachowicz is more of like a Oliveira type character because he came into the UFC and I was roundly unimpressed with a lot of what he did. He surprised me against Alexander Gustafsson by making Gustafsson dive on takedowns against him. And then he's just sort of turned it around and became something quite special. I think he's helped along by the fact that he's just so weird, striking-wise. I said this on Twitter after the fight, but I would never recommend anyone try and strike like Jan Blachowicz, but I can see why it works so well. This is something that he mainly does against southpaws, but even against orthodox fighters, he was doing against Glover and all sorts. But he leads with a wide swinging overhand, which is completely honest. He tells you what he's going to do, and he does it as hard as he can. And then he uses that to try and land sneaky punches afterwards and sneaky kicks. He's got a really weird sort of cross-body power thing where his right hand and his left foot are the power strikes. He did some good work with his right leg in this one. Obviously, we'll get onto that in a minute. But that step-up left kick, the one that he was using against Dominic Reyes, that's murderous. He'll throw like the overhand, and then he'll throw the overhand and step up into the left kick. He'll throw the overhand and step up into a shorter left hook. He chinned Ankalaev with that in, I think, the second round. And then he did the same again. He threw a big wide overhand, but he came up the inside with a left uppercut. He's very sneaky. And he throws wide and dumb because he wants you to deal with the wide dumb strikes and then catch you with the sneaky ones. If you watch that weird thing he does where he lunges forward behind his face and squaring his body, and then he throws a palm down left hook to the body and a right straight to the head. Left hook to the body, right straight to the head is a beautiful combination. I love it. Combination 2 punches, but it's a lovely setup. Works really well. John Dodson did it really well. Joe Louis knocked out a number of dudes with it, but he won the world title from the Cinderella Man, Jim Braddock, with it. It's a classic. Left hook to the body, right straight down the middle. But the reason that he can do that again is because he keeps throwing this wide overhand right as a lead. So when he squares his body, you're actually fucking worried about it. And he can move his head well in close to you and then hit you with the left hook to the body. So really weird striking style. And then there's things like the kick to the shin. He was going shin on these low kicks. You don't, the low kick, low kicks below the knee, that's always on the outside. You want to hit the calf, and everything below the knee on the outside of the leg. If someone's standing slightly bladed, their shin will be turned in anyway. So you don't really want to kick to the inside of that anyway. But Jan Blachowicz, it's basically like he's gone, well, I'm going to throw this kick, and you're going to try and check. So why don't we just take out the middleman, and I'll kick your shin anyway? And you're going, that's crazy. Tony Ferguson used to do it, and Cub Swanson does it occasionally. But you see them do it, and they can come out of it worse than their opponent. But Blachowicz just seems like he's made of iron. He hit him with shin-on-shin kicks until he was falling down. Really incredible. And then the other thing about Jan Blachowicz is that he consciously chooses not to jab, even though he's got a decent jab, which normally drives me nuts. Someone like Cody Garbrandt jabbed once in the UFC. It was really good, but never did it again. But Blachowicz will occasionally just use body jabs to set up an overhand. We'll talk about that later with Ponzi. But he saved his jab in this fight for when Magomed Ankalaev came forward. And so he'd throw the jab and then he'd try and throw his cross afterwards. And Blachowicz would go back and break him off with the jab, moving backwards. He does jabs while moving backwards and reaching with his other hand. And it was something that I thought would get him really badly hurt against Izzy. And it just confused Izzy. He's just reaching for all Izzy's punches. And I'm going, yes, Izzy will throw a high kick around that and it will really give him problems. And Izzy couldn't deal with it at all. So it is a weirdness to Jan Blachowicz. Could be the curse of the hangman's rope or the blessing of the hangman's rope. But he's very weird. And then in respect to Ankalaev, because he got beat up in round 1 and round 2, and then he just changed it up and he went to the grappling. And Blachowicz was having a lot of trouble with the wrestling. I remembered Blachowicz being better at stopping takedowns, but then it was against people like Devin Clark, who's 1, not good, and 2, small, and Luke Rockhold, who's obviously massively undersized for light heavyweight. So he ended up on bottom, and then he kept going for a Kimura from half guard, which is one of the things about it is that a lot of people who attempt the Kimura from half guard, they sit up on their elbow. When you sit up on your elbow, the other guy can reach through behind you with both, he'll put his hands, one hand around your back, one hand in front of you, reach through with both hands to your forearm, which is on the floor because you're propped up on it, and then they'll just pull that underneath you. How's your father? You're in a Dagestani handcuff and you're getting fucked up. If you watch people like Gordon Ryan and Roger Gracie used to love the Kimura from half guard. I've been doing a lot of stuff on Roger Gracie lately, but they really like grabbing over the arm and keeping their elbow inside the crook of the opponent's arm and then working their way down to the grip. They don't tend to sit up and go to the arm so much. There was a really good example of someone doing it on the undercard. Might have been TJ Thingy, or it might have been that 10th Planet lad. Yeah, Kimura from half guard can be really important technique. Amanda Nunes hurt Juliana Pena in the first fight, and Pena used the Kimura from half guard to repeatedly shut Nunes down, keep her hands locked together. So that's the thing. If they unlock their hands, you tear their arm off. So even though you might not get the submission, you do have them locked into something for a moment while you can start moving your legs. She started inserting butterfly hooks. She started going up to the turtle and working from there, getting stuff going. But Blachowicz, he sat up onto his arm, went for the Kimura, and Ankalaev grabbed the Dagestani handcuff while he was sat up on the arm, smashed him down, hit him 100 times. And then the 5th round, Jan came out so ready to stop takedowns and then just sort of fell over and ended up on the bottom. So 3, 4, 5 was what most people scored for Ankalaev. 1, 2 for Blachowicz. Some people gave Blachowicz 3. Basically, for a split draw, a majority draw is when two judges score a draw. A split draw is when you have one judge score fighter A, another judge score fighter B, and then a third judge score it a draw. So basically, anytime you score it a draw, you're basically opening the window to fuck it up for everyone else. If everyone picks one fighter, draws don't happen. But draws typically happen when there's a point deduction or 3 rounds, 10-9, 2 rounds the other way, one of them's 10-9 and one of them's 10-8. So they're pretty hard to get because that's a design choice. And the reason for that is because we like decisive winners and we like to, especially in title fights, have a person to put the belt on. And this went about as badly as it could because we didn't get a person to put the belt on. And the UFC said, fuck it, let's just act like that fight didn't happen. Kind of unfortunate because I enjoyed it. I thought it was a decent fight. Got weird stuff from Blachowicz on the feet. You got some fun grappling from Ankalaev in the later rounds. But Dana White was like, oh, it's the worst fight I've ever seen. I was going, what? Very strange behaviour. Other good stuff on the card. Morono versus Ponzinibbio. This was quite fun. I was just glad that Robbie Lawler dropped out of this because some people were like, this card got worse when Robbie Lawler dropped out. And I think that's insane. Robbie Lawler is so... I love him. I'm a huge Robbie Lawler fan and I have been since, his first UFC run. No one was more hyped for his career resurgence in the UFC than me, but I'm going to say this, he's washed. And watching him against Brian Barberena was sad because he has always been so much better than Brian Barberena at his absolute best. But you got a better fight out of this. You got Morono, who's tough as nails, makes a scrappy fight out of things. And you got Ponzinibbio, who has lost a step, As opposed to Ponzinibbio knocking out Robbie Lawler for no reason, we don't get anything out of that. One of Morono's great things in this one was coming off a moving base. It's a point fighty thing if you think of someone like MVP or Stephen Thompson, but even Rose Namajunas. If you think about the ones that she caught, when she gets into longer fights with people who know her, her fights are a lot closer. What she's done very well against a couple of opponents is catch them early because she has this great bouncing and out style where she's bouncing, and then she's suddenly up on you with a good left hook or a good high kick. So that's how she caught Joanna Jędrzejczyk in the first fight. That's how she caught Wei Li in their first fight. And she can't keep it up over the full 5 rounds, which is why she comes down off the balls of her feet and she gets into longer exchanges and gets beat up a bit. And those fights are closer when she gets dragged into deeper waters. But Morono was doing that really well here. He was just coming off a bouncing, moving base, and he could step in with a good 1-2 and catch Ponzinibbio. Because basically what you're doing is you're numbing the opponent to fairly large movements in their vision constantly. Your chest and upper body are always bouncing up and down, in and out. Makes it a lot harder to read when you're stepping in for real. Ponzinibbio, meanwhile, tried to establish the body jab. It's something he always does. Body jab and then into the overhand. It'd be lovely to see him dip for a body jab and come up with a left hook. Doesn't really use the left hook much. He is all about the jab and the overhand. And he did finally catch him in the 3rd round. He really had to grit his teeth to get through it, though, because even in the 3rd round, he got really quite badly stunned by Morono, and then he turned it around. But a really fun fight, I thought. We're into the bad middleweight bouts now, so Dricus du Plessis versus Darren Till. This one's sad, to be honest, because I think Darren Till could really benefit from doing the Charles Oliveira, Chito Vera, take a step back, fight some worse opposition, get some wins under your belt, and do it in a short period, do it in multiple fights over a year or two. Because his problem is he's billed as a world-class middleweight. He has 1 win at middleweight. Ever, maybe? Only Kelvin Gastelum. Looked great in that fight, but he's not a world-class middleweight. He's not been proving he's a world-class middleweight. Maybe he's got a good contract or something, and they're just giving him murderers. But what's happening is he gets injured, so he can only do 1 fight a year. And then he takes on a ranked middleweight and he gets smoked. And a lot of the time you're watching him in the fights and people are going like, he's never learned anything about wrestling. And I remember his first fights in the UFC. He wasn't fighting killers at welterweight, but he was fighting good fighters, guys in the UFC, respectable fighters. And he was showing multiple facets of MMA and looked pretty decent, stopping takedowns and things. It's watching things like this or the Brunson one where he just lifted him into mount on him. But this one, there's a moment where Dricus du Plessis goes for he's in on a double leg, And Darren Till reaches across his back and just sits down like he's taking him into a crackdown. But he's not. He's just sitting down underneath him. And then he tries to scramble up and hit a switch, but he's not in position to do it at all. And then he gets flattened out again. I think he just makes really bad decisions and shits the bed because every fight is a huge fight. Whereas if he was doing what Charles Oliveira did, where he's just fighting 6 times in 2 years or whatever it is, just racking up bonuses and being entertaining and getting experience in the ring. It's so important because everyone's going like, he's training with Khamzat. How can his wrestling be this bad? And I'm thinking, he's got to be doing something with Khamzat. Khamzat is not just having him in the camp and then, there are people you can't train with effectively because they're not any good at all, and they wouldn't be training together if that was the case. So he must be giving Khamzat something to work with in training. He's just making baffling errors in these fights. And it helped that Duplessis came out and immediately put it on him. He immediately took him down along the fence with the seatbelt across the back and started pummeling him with shots to the side of the head. Hit him with a beautiful headbutt to the back of the head, the old rabbit headbutt. So rare. The only other one I can remember is Kimo Leopoldo in Sakuraba's first ever MMA fight. Finished him with headbutts to the back of the head from the turtle. That's a deep cut. Go watch that fight, which may or may not have been, a work. But Duplessis' quick start had one really nice effect, which was when Darren Till got back to the feet, he went after it. So much of Darren Till's game, even in his prime at welterweight, is just like flapping his hands and then not throwing. The first round against Tyron Woodley, he threw 0 strikes. It's crazy. Go look at the fight metric, or just watch the fight. He showed so much fake stuff, never committed because he was terrified of getting taken down. Second round, he comes out and his corner have been like, you lost the round, you need to throw punches. Comes out, shows no feints, just throws a big running left hand, and Tyron Woodley immediately counters it because it was just so obvious. Whereas this fight, he was getting stuck in, he was throwing left hands, left elbows. I thought he looked pretty decent on the feet. But even that fight with Whittaker that everyone points to is like, well, he could hang with Whittaker. I think that was more a stylistic thing. Whittaker's quite cautious on the feet, and Darren Till basically trades on you being cautious. If you're not cautious and you just get in his face, you can give him a really hard time. If you stand there while he's flapping his hands at you and don't do anything, he'll throw one left hand every 2 minutes and might give you trouble. But yeah, I think what this dude needs is confidence, and that's only built through... It was J.M. Blakely who invented the J.M. press. He said that confidence is built from simulated victories or past victories. Simulated victories in the gym and past victories in competition. I think, Darren Till needs a win right now. Or in the words of Alan Partridge, he needs 2 wins because one to balance out the loss and one because a win would be nice. Duplessis was good. He's still just awkward and janky as hell, but who cares? He's winning fights. Again, the submission was like, there were 2 face cranks on this card. And you go, shouldn't be tapping to face cranks, really, lads. But it was that Darren Till getting deflated thing. Ilia Topuria versus Bryce Mitchell was my pick for the good fight on this card, and I think it delivered. I want to say how impressed I am with Bryce Mitchell's striking in his last 2. I mean, obviously he lost this one and got knocked down in the course of it, and the striking led to him losing. But I watched this guy before the Barboza fight, and every fight his striking was fucking terrible. And I thought, well, he's kind of like Chase Hooper. He's one of those sort of guys, the Dustin Hazlett. He's going to be exclusively a grappler and dealing with, the striking is all going to be mitigating the opponent's threat and trying to get the takedown. But, if you watched him against Barboza, and even in this one, he's putting it on them. He's going after them. He used the side kick, the lead leg side kick, which we were talking about all last week with Stephen Thompson. It can be such a surprising sap on the opponent's endurance. And it also just physically blocks them from stepping. He used that a load of times. Used the front snap kick to the body a load of times. Used his back leg to kick the body tons. Topuria was clearly the more powerful man, and he would let, Topuria would swing at him and he'd throw back. And he'd hit Topuria because he's longer. And obviously his punches weren't having the same effect on Topuria, but I was really impressed by him doing it. Takedown-wise, I also quite like what he was doing early going, which was just reaching for snatch singles. We talked about this with Michael Chandler showing them against Dustin Poirier. But if you reach out for someone's leg, if you watch someone like Kade Ruotolo, does it all the time, Don't put the knee to the floor, just bend forward and reach for the leg with both hands, basically. They have to pull their leg back, or you grab their leg. It's a really easy setup for a single leg. Chris Weidman used to hit him all the time. If you watch Weidman versus Mousasi, Mousasi has no idea how to deal with it. Just gets thrown all across the ring. But I really like him because you're not going to end up getting sprawled on. Whereas in the later going, you saw he was shooting into his knees and ending up in front headlocks and things. Grabbing those singles, what happened was he was getting back towards the fence, and I was going, oh, that's not going to work, because he's grabbing these singles, and then he's got the whole ring, the whole cage to run across to hit another fence. You know, you got a lot of, it stops being wrestling when you hit the fence. It starts being cage wrestling, which is a different sport entirely. Your wrestling credentials don't mean nearly as much against the fence. Just watch Sabatello versus Rufion Stotts from the weekend. Stotts has all the accolades in wrestling. Sabatello, incredible along the fence, giving him horrible trouble. But again, having horrible trouble himself out in the open. But then what Bryce Mitchell was able to do was he actually turned the corner on him as Topuria was coming and striking, grabbed the single, and he turned him at 90 degrees and ran him onto the fence to his right side. It was really nice. And then he started working from there. Couldn't get it done early, started slowing down. Topuria hit him with a couple of really good shots. Topuria has a great overhand and he throws combinations after it, which I really like. But then he showed an overhand and then he punched right straight down on the body. Loved it. I was looking forward to his bodywork in this fight because Bryce Mitchell, he's another one who uses bodywork and you can tell values bodywork, but also responds really badly to being hit in the body. He's like BJ Penn, Daniel Cormier, Derek Lewis levels of overreacting to body shots. The Diazes are pretty bad at it too. If you see the rare opponents who don't fixate on the Diaz brothers' heads and hit them in the body, they almost double over every time they get hit. But Cormier is probably the funniest because Cormier, if you watch him against Frank Mir or Josh Barnett, this is how far back in the day we realised it would be a problem, and then John Jones really showed it. But Frank Mir hits him with like a step-up knee, and Cormier like jumps backwards, like he's doing one of those posed photos where someone's punching someone and the other guy's leaping through the air backwards, bent in half. And the same thing happened when Josh Barnett threw a body kick at him. But yeah, Mitchell doesn't respond well to them, and Topuria threw a couple of good ones, but it was a great overhand. Really started things going badly for Mitchell, and he started diving on bad takedowns. This is the thing, on the bottom of side control, it's tough, man, because you don't want to be on the bottom getting hit all the time. And the best escapes from the bottom of side control in MMA are to turn to your knees and wrestle up, which is wrestling, or to turn to your knees into the opponent and come up on the single, which is wrestling. So doing that against a much better wrestler is always a little bit tricky. So Mitchell got stuck on the bottom. He did come up at one point, and Topuria just dug the underhook and pancaked him back flat. But it was trying to get up again, and he got arm triangled from like a leg ride, whatever you want to call it, a single hook back control. He sort of started standing up, and Topuria just grabbed around the neck and arm and strangled him, just slammed him back to the mat. So really impressive from Topuria. I was still kind of impressed by Bryce Mitchell because on paper, this fight and Edson Barboza, he should have had nothing on the feet for them. And he's very quickly developed quite a bit. And obviously the confidence to go after them, which is respectable. I like Bryce Mitchell. I think if I had a conversation with him, it would be agony. I'd be looking for the door after a little while. But he's a nightmare blunt rotation just on his own. But I do think he's really impressed me as a fighter in the last couple, because I thought he was just a one-dimensional Dustin Hazlett chappie, and he isn't. And Ilia Topuria, lest I not say enough positive about him, obviously, very legit. Looking forward to seeing him. The thing that does seem to trouble him a little bit is the reach disadvantage, because he is just trying to get in with overhands. And very rarely throws like an inside low kick or anything like that to close the distance down quickly. Had a ton of trouble with Jai Herbert. Jai Herbert's on a, 1-3 run, but Jai Herbert really made him look awful in the first round. So long boys are going to be a problem for Ilia Topuria, and that's kind of the thing, because he's obviously they're always talking about this Paddy Pimblett matchup, but he's a featherweight, and going up to lightweight, to get the money and the attention. But even at featherweight, there's some very tall guys out there. I don't rate Ortega super highly, even though he's ranked super highly, but he's a very tall, long guy, and he benefits from that enormously, both with his jab and his punching more generally, but also with like snap downs. If you watch Ortega in the clinch with someone like Cub Swanson, he just reaches up over his head. like he just goes, oh, I can do this. I just said I was watching a load of Roger Gracie, but he's hitting snap downs that aren't even really snap downs, but he's so tall, he just puts his armpit over the top of the opponent's head as they're upright, and they can't like lift him off the floor to punish him because his legs are still on the floor. Raul Rosas versus Jay Perrin. Yeah, I've been really impressed by Rosas. I knew him as a striker, but he came out and wrestled, looked really good, went to the single leg, got the body lock off the single leg, which is a huge thing in MMA, particularly along the fence. If you run someone to the fence with a single leg, you can try and bounce them off and lock your hands behind them. Got on the back. Really nice back controlling work when he had one hook in. He was using the other hook, the instep underneath Perrin's ankle and forcing it out so that he couldn't get up. And then he switched to trying to get the hooks in. But yeah, got the rear naked choke, or the face crank at least, and got his submission and earned a bonus. Good for him. The lad was 10-7 though, or 10-6 or whatever. Was this a replacement? This might have been a replacement. Doesn't look like it. But whatever. Yeah, I mean, DC outright said it. He was like, the promotion's behind him. You're like, we're not supposed to say that. Must have been a blue moon, because Jairzinho Rosenstruck did something entertaining and knocked out Chris Dawkins very quickly. Edmund Shabazian, more bad middleweights, but Dalton Langumbula fighting someone's in the last 3 years has to go. These guys had a combined 6-fight losing streak. But yeah, I quite like what Shabazian was doing here. Lovely left front kick to the body. Or was he the orthodox fighter? Whatever it was an open guard matchup. He's throwing his rear leg to the body with the front kick. Langabula is throwing his rear leg round kick, and often the one would sneak inside the other. Shabazian was also throwing a long rear-handed uppercut to the body, like Arnold Allen does. Gervonta Davis is a great example in boxing. You can loop the rear hand and throw it to the body almost naked or just off the jab, because you can then get down behind your shoulder and glide past their lead shoulder. It's exactly like we're talking about with Paddy. You can throw your rear hand as long as you get down behind your fucking shoulder after you do it, or end with your rear hand, that is. But man, this fight, someone pointed it out on Reddit, but I meant to have a moan about Reddit comments, and on Twitter and on YouTube, dudes being like, that decision was so shady. It reminds me of, and then they'd name like another robbery, and then they'd say Jan versus O'Malley, and you go, no, those aren't the same thing. One of them relies on a 1-point difference either way, and you're arguing that top control needs to be scored more. The Paddy Pimblett one is like, the one guy didn't do anything the whole fight. Don't pretend they're the same thing. Just coming in to be like, yeah, I agree, and also Jan. Edmund Shabazian, someone on Reddit pointed out, but like, he got a moment of confidence, and you did see him just change immediately. He landed in the last round. In the second round, he just suddenly went, oh, okay, I've got this. And he throws a beautiful body kick and then a beautiful right hand to the body. And then he comes in with the knee, and Langabula just falls for it, hook, line, and sinker, and he finished him. Really lovely stuff. Buckley versus Curtis was incredibly frustrating, because Buckley, he showed that he knew the body shots were the right thing to do. Stepped in against Curtis, who had his guard up high and his shoulders up, hit him with 2 beautiful body shots, circled out, and then went back to throwing 5 punches at his head every time and landing nothing. And then he threw a low kick, and Curtis just stepped up the centre and hit him with a left straight. Curtis's left straight was landing loads because it was a fellow... Actually, it shouldn't have landed loads because it's a fellow southpaw. But he was just throwing 1-2s and catching Buckley naked. Buckley, like, super explosive. This was another Black Explosive title fight. Super explosive, but always on a straight line and not an awful lot of nuance. He's one of those guys who can do things, but does them because he's feeling like it, as opposed to going, that's the thing to do because that will build to this, or that's the thing to do because when he adapts to that, I can do this. He doesn't look at his opponent and say, what would work? He says, what do I feel like throwing? Which, fuck it. It resulted in his super viral knockout and probably the most money he's ever won. It just means that he's leaving wins on the table that a smarter fighter could have got, because he has the moves. He demonstrated that he could get to the body and really tear Curtis up around his guard. He just then didn't do it again. Quarantilo versus Hernandez was pretty much what was expected. Hernandez came out, was dominant for the first round, and then slowed the fuck down. I don't think it was the weight cut. I think he just is. That's who he is. You know, he danced around the ring loads in the first round, and particularly against like Donald Cerrone, he's just running onto the same intercepting knee over and over again and fading. But the elbow in this one was beautiful. Just that slow mo, just the point, tearing Quarantilo's face open like it was a piece of tissue paper. It was really impressive. TJ Brown versus Eric Silva was a fun little grappling contest, and then Cameron Simon versus Stephen Kozlow was also a fun little that was super weird because it was like a fight out of time. They brought in Stephen Kozlow, and Rogan got to do all the 10th Planet rubber guard position names. He was going, he's got him in mission control. He's going to try to move to Chill Dog. Oh no, he's gone to invisible collar. What? It's 2022. How is this happening? So it's quite like a nice throwback. But I really felt for Stephen Kozlow in this one, and I felt for Cameron Simon too, because, well, firstly, Cameron Simon hits him with a knee while his knees are on the ground, and it's illegal. And both of them realise, and Cameron Simon stops, and they have to wait for Chris Tognoni to go, oh, was that illegal? And then stop the fight and check on Kozlow. And that it sucks because Cameron Simon knew he'd committed a foul. He wasn't there staring at him for ages like Piotr Yan. This is a lot like that Piotr Yan fight. No, it's not. But he committed the foul, and then you got the awful situation where if Kozlow doesn't take the DQ, anything you do against him is now asterisk, because a knee to the head on the ground, especially one that you take flush because you're not thinking about knees to the head on the ground, really big deal. Fight-changing strikes. And obviously Kozlow wanted to continue fighting, but now he loses half his purse, and Simon doesn't even come out looking that much better because we're all going to go, oh man, he did land an illegal knee that seemed to change the course of the fight. But the grappling in this one was great fun. I think this was the one with the really well-applied Kimura that I was talking about. Well worth your time. Kozlow just needs to fucking strike from the top more, because, you know, if you do just strike from the top, people insist that you never get any finishes and you're boring. Like, I've had people tell me that about Habib, and I always think, like, no, I found him really fun because he was always striking. But just trying to submit people, really, really hard, because you're just doing jiu-jitsu. And even, you know, roll a couple of rounds of jiu-jitsu with people. It's fucking hard to submit people who know what you're trying to do. As I'm sure Kozlow knows. It's just that he did not really take advantage of his top positions very much. Even one of the things that, you know, we laugh at the rubber guard all the time. It's a very niche system. You have to have great flexibility to use it. And you're still risking your knees and lower back if you've got great flexibility. You know, sound off in the comments about how it's just the angle and stuff. I'll come back, you know, someone will come back with how many anything have they won. Then someone will say John Thor blank, Keith Krikorian, and you'll say, well, how much rubber guard do they use? And it goes on and on and on. But basically, rubber guard is a weird sort of gimmicky system that no one's really applied that effectively, except Ben Saunders. And by using that invisible collar position, he was able to land some really good elbows from the bottom. And Cameron Simon actually put the guy in the invisible collar. Stephen Kozlow put the guy in the invisible collar and didn't throw a single elbow, which was really disappointing. Did I say Ben Saunders? Yeah, Ben Saunders. Go watch some Ben Saunders, because he was great fun back in the day. Anyway, I've rambled for almost an hour now, so I reckon that'll do us for today. I'm probably going to write something midweek, or if not, there's always the Boycast. To get all my extra shit, sign up to the Patreon, support the podcast, get extra content. Everybody wins. If you want to send an email to the podcast, jackslackpodcast@gmail.com. And if you want to see what I'm writing anytime, fightprimer.com. I am your boy, Jack Slack. Nefarious gambling practices bless.